Hi everyone, this is Courtney from Ruby Red Farm. Today I'm going to be performing a garden rescue. But first, chores. So I happen to be off work this morning. This is kind of a pre-planned thing through the summer where I take one morning off a week just to keep up, quite frankly. So we kind of talked it over last night, trying to decide what was the best way to spend my 3 or 4 hours that I get this morning. And for me, the biggest priority is my garden. So just for reference, I'm filming this video at the beginning of September. Here in Indiana, our first frost is in about a month. So usually early to mid-October is when that first frost hits. We actually got close the other night. It got down to 39 degrees, which is very cold for September. So we're having just kind of very odd weather this year. We had too much rain in July, no rain in August. And then now that it's September, we've had very cold nights all at once. Obviously the nights are supposed to get cooler in September, but not all at once like that. Now it is going to warm back up. We think things are going to get back to somewhat of a normal, but the damage has been done, right? So my garden's a mess. There's weeds everywhere. We have quite a few plants that between the drought and then the cold have just kind of given up, which a lot of them were close to giving up anyway. I'm gonna pull a few of those plants, just try to get my garden cleaned up, partly just so I feel better coming out here and looking at it, but also to try to get whatever life I can out of the plants that remain. I really need a lot more produce because our farmers market goes through the end of October. A lot of other vendors are going to be running out of produce as well, and so all of us are going to kind of try to step it up, bring as much produce as we possibly can for my little town, and part of making that happen is cleaning this thing out. So let's get to it. I'm going to come through in a little bit and push mow this once it dries, but I think I got the edges done. Yeah, the tomatoes in particular are not liking these cold nights. I will probably come through and pick some of the green tomatoes this Saturday to get ready for market, and then actually trim these plants back quite a bit just to give them any chance of survival here. Our spaghetti squash did not do well this year. We had the weeds unfortunately win. And on top of that, next to them we had planted some potatoes that we were kind of waiting to see what would happen, so we didn't weed them. Well, they had gotten flooded out on the 4th of July and they never ended up coming up. So in that waiting, we essentially completely lost track of our spaghetti squash plants. So there's a few just now that we're kind of finding, but most of them are pretty rotten. The squash bugs have hit us really hard this year. The pig will enjoy this one. So these are our first tomato plants of the year. As you can see, they are struggling. Most of these plants really struggled actually more with the excessive rain that we got in July. But then because of that, they really didn't form good roots. And when the drought hit in August, they just could not cope. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull these out here. There are a handful of tomatoes on these plants, but they're just way too small and most of them have bug damage. So we can't sell these at market, and the pigs and chickens are going to enjoy them more than we would. So we're going to go ahead and just give any of these little ones that we find to the animals. Ground so hard I can't get the stakes out of the ground. Yeah, you can see these plants, they just don't even have any leaves left on them. And obviously a plant with no leaves on it isn't exactly going to thrive. Now if you're thinking to yourself, well, why didn't you just water the plants? Obviously that could have worked. But when you have 25 different tomato plants and a very limited amount of time, it's just not worth it, unfortunately. So hopefully in the future we're going to be putting in some drip line and those types of things where we just turn on a hose or put it on a timer. We just don't have those things in place yet. And so unfortunately, with us both working, with us running the farmers market, I teach a class in the fall at a college. I actually am coaching both of my kids' soccer teams right now. And not to make excuses, but just to paint the picture that we're just very busy. We have very limited time. And so unfortunately, the day-to-day tasks of the farm take the priority. Obviously, we have to keep the animals alive. And the garden tends to take a little bit of a back seat in that busy season. And so we almost have to just cross our fingers, hope the weather cooperates. This year it did not. And now we are simply cleaning up the mess that it left behind. We still remain incredibly grateful for what our garden gives us every year, but we have to know that there are risks with the style of gardening that we do. And one of those is that it's very susceptible to not having enough rainfall. And that unfortunately is just what happened here in late August. Most years we'll leave a lot of this stuff in the garden for the chickens, and we still will do that with a lot of other things, but with these going south so early, I didn't want them to just sit here and rot the rest of the summer. So this batch here will go to the chickens and the pigs. The pigs will eat the stalk and all. Unfortunately though, right when we need them, we're down to just one pig. We scheduled our butcher dates way in advance and ended up with them going this past weekend to the butcher. And so we're down to our one lonely pig that we're gonna process ourselves, but she seems pretty content to be eating all the scraps. I think she's happy to finally not have competition, to be honest. Gosh, it is so dry. I cannot get these stakes out of the ground. This is just crazy. It needs to rain. I'll keep working on these. I'll show you what they look like once I pick out the ones I'm gonna pull. I think honestly though, out of this whole batch, I only see about 2 or 3 plants that are worth trying to keep. So this is gonna get trimmed down quite a bit over here. Then we'll mow and clean it up real nice. More evidence of the weird weather we had this year. Our apple trees actually didn't produce any apples. These are still young trees, so we don't expect a lot of apples. But most of the trees that did make apples last year did not make any this year. Again, too much rain early, not enough rain late. Just want to show you what I mean by excessive rainfall. So, not that tomato plants typically get incredibly deep roots, but they're supposed to be a whole lot deeper than this. So when we got all that rain in July, the plants just did not have to develop really thorough root systems, so they didn't. This led to 2 things. It led to the plants falling over. We had a lot more problems with our plants falling over this year. And then on top of that, once the drought did hit, they didn't have good rootlings in place and they just could not keep up with the dryness. So lots of rain in July sounds like a great thing until it is followed by not enough rain in August. So very sad that these tomatoes just failed this year. I'm gonna get bonus points with Brandon. I'm actually gonna go ahead and put these either in the greenhouse or in the barn, get them out of the way so that we don't end up accidentally mowing them and then plowing them in the spring because I never come out and clean them up. So I'm gonna do it now. I'm very proud of myself. All right, we'll take this load to the pigs. will be joy in the morning. If it's not good, then it's not done. No, he's not done with me yet. There will be joy in the morning. All right, I'll block the sun here. I think I'm good with these tomatoes for now. I got most of the really bad ones out of here. The rest, I'll give them a shot and see if they can at least produce a little bit more. It is supposed to rain this weekend, so fingers crossed that we actually get some of that. I'm gonna go ahead and move on and go to our very dried out original green beans that have very much lived out their lives. These green beans are the ones we planted way back at the end of April, and so they are very much done after 4.5 months of labor for us. There are a few that are still putting out some decent flowers, so we'll keep those. But any of the plants that are browning and starting to put off real rusty leaves, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull those. Okay. There's something very satisfying and yet at the same time a little bittersweet about pulling these plants. It's really nice to know I have that many fewer plants that I have to now pick and take care of, but it also means the end of our gardening season is approaching very quickly. All right, pretty happy with that. I got over half of the plants pulled. They, again, were just not producing good green beans. We will give these other plants about a week and then probably the rest of this row will go. I'm gonna move on now to some yellow squash. We normally like to grow a smoother version of a yellow squash and those sell really well. This year, I just could not find the seeds in time and ended up just growing a more traditional yellow squash. We could not sell them to save our lives. I bet we sold 2 the whole season. And so we've been giving them to the animals. We finally just stopped tending the plants. And I'm gonna go ahead and retrieve the rest of them and give those to the chickens. Have I mentioned that I hate weeds? All right, first load going to the chickens. All right, I'm gonna take a break for now. I've been out here for a couple hours. Really have gotten a lot done. I need to wait until everything dries up before I can mow. And so I will probably go on in, get some indoor stuff done, and I gotta go to work this afternoon. Once I get home from work though, I'm gonna go ahead and tackle the rest. Probably gonna actually use trimmers to cut these big weeds just to save my back, and then either weed eat or mow the rest. Just trying to get this thing looking like a garden again. All right, home from work. Time for another round of chores. Get these guys moved and fed, gather the eggs, and I'll be back in the garden. I think they like their offerings from earlier. Not a whole lot left in those squash. All right, where were we? So I just went to work for about 4 hours and then came home, finished dinner, and did the chores. So we're gonna get back at it here in the garden. It is now evening time. As a result, it is a lot hotter, but it's also a lot drier. So I'm gonna actually cut most of these tall weeds just so that I don't hurt my back. And then I'm actually gonna be push mowing. So I'm gonna push mow a few areas, just try to clean as much out of here as I can to try to get this garden a lot more manageable and quite frankly looking a little bit better, because it's a little depressing to come out and have your garden just be a mess. So gonna go ahead and get to it here and hopefully show you guys a much neater looking garden here in just a little bit. He's getting the edges mown down for me. Saves me a ton of time. This is crazy. This thing's practically a tree. If you guys have any solution for squash vine borers, I'm all ears. These guys have absolutely destroyed my zucchini and squash harvest this year. This area over here is looking so much better. Gotta get the giant pile obviously out of here, but I can kind of tell where my garden's supposed to be again. It's time for me to get to work with the push mower. So while it's not ideal to be push mowing the garden like this, everybody's garden I think gets a little crazy by August into September. It is completely fine for your garden to get into this shape. It does not mean that you failed at gardening. It just means that you're human. We end up push mowing pretty much every year from about mid-July on through our pathways. This year it just got a little more out of control than normal, but nonetheless, there's no shame in this. We're trying to keep the weed seeds down so that they don't spread quite as much. And then on top of that, again, just for our own sanity, trying to make sure that the garden is an enjoyable place to be, because we're not going to want to come out here if it just looks awful all the time. So see if I can get this back section a little cleaned up here. I cannot properly explain how much better I feel just from having this area mowed. Just know, guys, that gardening gets messy, and so does life, and that's okay. Do whatever you need to do to stay sane, and just remember that all of that hard work reaped tons of benefits throughout the growing season. I hope you all can remember to stay thankful through this harvest season. This was Courtney from Ruby Red Farm, and I hope you all have a great day.